Well, in 1998, this dog came into the local animal shelter. Very forlorn little animal, was paralyzed, in a wheelchair. The back half of its body was useless. They put it up for adoption on the internet, and suddenly they get a call from New York City from a guy, Clark Rockefeller, who really wants to adopt it and take care of its special needs, but can't come get it because he doesn't have a driver's license, and his private jet, he says, is in China with his wife. So they come to me, a guy who's living in Montana, but they know is sort of conversant with these types because I've gone to Princeton, I lived in New York City, saying, can you talk to this guy and make some arrangement with him? And once I talked to him and realized what an eccentric he is, and a kook, he calls himself a freelance central banker. He says he lives next door to Tony Bennett. I decide that as a writer, I have to meet him, and so I drive the dog halfway to New York and end up flying the last half because I have a nervous breakdown on the trip. And that's how we meet. I mean, you couldn't have put that together in the movies. In 2008, after I'd known him for 10 years, he was unmasked as an entirely different person, as a total impostor. He was, in fact, a suspect in a murder from 1985 out here in Los Angeles, a very gruesome murder. He was not a Rockefeller. He wasn't even an American. He was a German guy who'd come over at 17 as a kid. I ended up then attending his murder trial, which was only 2013, a year ago, here in LA. And through that murder trial, I asked the question, how had this guy fooled me for 10 years? What is the nature of a con from the point of view of the dupe, not the con man? What is it in us and in me that allows ourselves to be so deluded and almost wishes for it, because life maybe isn't exciting enough? He was not so much charismatic as one of the most cunning storytellers I've ever met. He would lay out little pieces of a story or of a jigsaw puzzle such that it kept you constantly wanting more, and he was very intriguing. For example, he used to tell me that he had a private laboratory that researched speed of light propulsion systems for the Defense Department. And one day he showed me a picture of a bunch of trees taken from the air, and he told me the laboratory was hidden underneath the trees. And you'd think that I would have seen through that as an obvious kind of sham, but it lit up my mind. In my mind, I saw that place more vividly than if he had showed me the inside of it. And he did this with story after story. He told me when I visited him in New Hampshire that the house next door belonged to J.D. Salinger. And even though I couldn't see the house next door, there was sort of forest, I imagined it there. He told me when I visited him in New York that he lived next door to Tony Bennett and that he could hear him singing through the walls at night. And so I would kind of listen while I was in the apartment. And in the same way you enchant a child, you say, hear those jingle bells? That's Santa, flying through the air. He always knew how to sort of place very evocative and alluring details for stories that I could then fill in the blanks for. And that's really, I think, the secret of how he drew me in. He drew in the writer in me, the storyteller. Well, when I first spoke to him, I heard his stories and got a sense of how he lived, and believed that it would have been malpractice for me as a novelist not to get to know him better. I thought someday I'll base a character on him. Maybe I'll even write nonfiction about him. Once he became my friend, that went by the wayside. I decided I had to give him his privacy, his confidentiality. When it turned out that he was a murderer and a con man and so on, well, all bets were off, and all of a sudden all this material that had come from this long friendship had usefulness, and I gave myself permission finally to exploit it. And so that maybe sounded a little cold-blooded, but writers are always looking around in their social relationships and in their acquaintance and even their close family relationships for material. It's what we do, and we have certain ethical or moral boundaries about how we use it, but we're predatory in a benevolent way. And what happens with somebody like this is when you find out that you're dealing with a criminal, when you're dealing with somebody who has no ethics whatsoever, it kind of gives you permission to let your killer instinct out, you know. And so I really went after him and what I remembered of our relationship once I knew he was even worse than me. And I also wanted to ask the question, what's the difference between a con man and a writer? Is a writer just conning the people around him because he has a use for them? Is his intimacy real? Are his friendships authentic? I really wanted to ask that question, and I have a complicated answer to it. And it's that writers' relations with others are really not normal in some fundamental way, you know.